Chapter 8 of Foxe's Book of Martyrs looks at an account of the persecutions in Bohemia under the papacy, and I highly suggest you read all of the chapter. We're going to look particularly at the part about the persecution of John Huss. So let's begin. John Huss was born at Hussnitz, a village in Bohemia, about the year 1380. His parents gave him the best education their circumstances would admit, and having acquired a tolerable knowledge of the classics at a private school, he was removed to the University of Prague, where he soon gave strong proofs of his mental powers and was remarkable for his diligence and application to study. In 1398, Huss commenced Bachelor of Divinity and was after successfully chosen pastor of the Church of Bethlehem in Prague and dean and proctor of the university. In these stations, he discharged his duties with great fidelity, and became at length so conspicuous for his preaching, which was so in conformity with the doctrine of Wycliffe, that it was not likely he could long escape the notice of the Pope and his adherents, against whom he inveighed with so small degree of asperity. The English reformist Wycliffe had so kindled the light of Reformation that it began to illuminate the darkest corners of popery and ignorance. His doctrines spread into Bohemia and were well received by a great number of people, but by none so particularly as John Huss and his zealous friend and fellow martyr, Jerome of Prague. The Archbishop of Prague, finding the reformists daily increasing, issued a decree to suppress the further spreading of Wycliffe's writings. But this had an effect quite different to what he expected, for it stimulated the friends of these doctrines to greater zeal, and almost the whole university united to propagate them. Being strongly attached to the doctrines of Wycliffe, Huss opposed the decree of the archbishop, who, however, at length obtained a bull from the Pope, giving him commission to prevent the publishing of Wycliffe's doctrines in his province. By virtue of this bull, the archbishop condemned the writings of Wycliffe. He also proceeded against 4 doctors, who had not delivered up copies of that divine, and prohibited them, notwithstanding their privileges, to preach to any congregation. Dr. Huss, with some other members of the university, protested against these proceedings, and entered an appeal from the sentence of the archbishop. The affair being made known to the Pope, he granted a commission to Cardinal Colonna to cite John Huss to appear personally at the court of Rome, to answer the accusations laid against him, of preaching both errors and heresies. Dr. Huss desired to be excused from a personal appearance, and was so greatly favored in Bohemia that King Wenceslaus, the Queen, the nobility, and the university desired the Pope to disperse with such an appearance, as also that he would not suffer the kingdom of Bohemia to lie under the accusation of heresy, but permit them to preach the gospel with freedom in their places of worship. 3 proctors appeared for Dr. Huss before Cardinal Colonna. They endeavored to excuse his absence, and said they were ready to answer in his behalf, but the cardinal declared Huss contumacious, and excommunicated him accordingly. The proctors appealed to the Pope, and appointed 4 cardinals to examine the process. These commissioners confirmed the former sentence, and extended the excommunication not only to Huss, but to all his friends and followers. From this unjust sentence Huss appealed to a future council, but without success, and notwithstanding so severe a decree, and an expulsion in consequence from his church in Prague, he retired to Hussnitz, his native place, where he continued to promulgate his new doctrine, both from the pulpit and with the pen. The letters which he wrote at this time were very numerous, and he compiled a treatise in which he maintained that reading the books of Protestants could not be absolutely forbidden. He wrote in defense of Wycliffe's book on the Trinity, and boldly declared against the vices of the Pope, the cardinals, and clergy of those corrupt times. He wrote also many other books, all of which were penned with a strength of argument that greatly facilitated the spread of his doctrines. In the month of November 1414, a general council was assembled at Constance in Germany, in order, as was pretended, for the sole purpose of determining a dispute then pending between 3 persons who contended for the papacy, but the real motive was to crush the progress of the Reformation. John Huss was summoned to appear at this council, and to encourage him, the emperor sent him a safe conduct. The civilities and even reverence Huss met with on his journey were beyond imagination. The streets and sometimes the very roads were lined with people, whom respect, rather than curiosity, had brought together. He was ushered into towns with great acclamations, and it was said that he passed through Germany in a kind of triumph. He could not help expressing his surprise at the treatment he received. "I thought," said he, "I had been an outcast. I now see my worst friends are in Bohemia." As soon as Huss arrived at Constance, he immediately took lodgings in a remote part of the city. A short time after his arrival came one Stephen Pelletz, who was employed by the clergy at Prague to manage the intended prosecution against him. Pelletz was afterwards joined by Michael de Cassas on the part of the court of Rome. These two declared themselves his accusers, and drew up a set of articles against him, which they presented to the Pope and the prelates of the council. When it was known that he was in the city, he was immediately arrested and committed prisoner to a chamber in the palace. This violation of common law and justice was particularly noticed by one of Huss's friends, who urged the imperial safe conduct. But the Pope replied that he never granted any safe conduct, nor was he bound by that of the emperor. While Huss was in confinement, the council acted the part of inquisitors. They condemned the doctrines of Wycliffe and even ordered his remains to be dug up and burned to ashes, which orders were strictly complied with. In the meantime, the nobility of Bohemia and Poland strongly interceded for Huss, and so far prevailed as to prevent his being condemned unheard, which had been resolved on by the commissioners appointed to try him. When he was brought before the council, the articles exhibited against him were read. They were upwards of 40 in number, and chiefly extracted from his writings. John Huss's answer was this: I did appeal unto the Pope, who being dead, and the cause of my matter remaining undetermined, I appealed likewise unto his successor, John the 23rd, before whom, when by the space of 2 years I could not be admitted for my advocacy by my advocates to defend my cause, I appealed unto the High Judge Christ. When John Huss had spoken these words, it was demanded of him whether he had received absolution of the priest or no. He answered, No. Then again, whether it was lawful for him to appeal unto Christ or no. Whereunto John Huss answered, Verily I do affirm here before you all, that there is no more just or effectual appeal than that appeal which is made unto Christ. For as much as the law doth determine that to appeal is no other thing than in a cause of grief or wrong done by an inferior judge, to implore and require aid at a higher judge's hand. Who is then a higher judge than Christ? Who, I say, can know or judge the matter more justly, or with more equity? When in him there is found no deceit, neither can he be deceived, or who can better help the miserable and oppressed than he? While John Huss, with a devout and sober countenance, was speaking and pronouncing these words, he was derided and mocked by all the whole council. These excellent sentences were esteemed as so many expressions of treason, and tended to inflame his adversaries. Accordingly, the bishops appointed by the council stripped him of his priestly garments, degraded him, put a paper mitre on his head, on which was painted devils, with this inscription, A ringleader of heretics. Which when he saw, he said, My Lord Jesus Christ for my sake did wear a crown of thorns. Why should not I then, for his sake, again wear this light crown, be it ever so ignominious? Truly I will do it, and that willingly. When it was set upon his head, the bishop said, Now we commit thy soul unto the devil. But I, said John Huss, lifting up his eyes towards the heaven, do commend into thy hands, O Lord Jesus Christ, my spirit which thou hast redeemed. When the chain was put about him at the stake, he said with a smiling countenance, My Lord Jesus Christ was bound with a harder chain than this for my sake, and why then should I be ashamed of this rusty one? When the faggots were piled up to his very neck, the Duke of Bavaria was so officious as to desire him to abjure. No, said Huss, I never preached any doctrine of an evil tendency, and what I taught with my lips I now seal with my blood. He then said to the executioner, You are now going to burn a goose. Huss signifying goose in the Bohemian language, but in a century you will have a swan, which you can neither roast nor boil. If he was prophetic, he might have meant Martin Luther, who shone about 100 years after, and who had a swan for his arms. The flames were now applied to the faggots, when our martyrs sung a hymn with so loud and cheerful a voice that he was heard through all the crackling of the combustibles and the noise of the multitude. At length his voice was interrupted by the severity of the flames, which soon closed his existence. Then, with great diligence, gathering the ashes together, they cast them into the river Rhine, that the last remnant of that man should not be left upon the earth, whose memory, notwithstanding, cannot be abolished out of the minds of the godly, neither by fire, neither by water, neither by any kind of torment.